Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Human Spirit Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be doing a deep dive into another one of my favorites, kids animated series, which is going to be Avatar: Last Airbender, which has recently just come out with a live version on Netflix, which kind of inspired this podcast as well. I guess to summarize why I'm doing these podcasts and the issue that I want to try and help solve within the world today is that I really feel like a lot of us have become aware that we are out of balance. We're not in harmony with nature, we're in harmony with our spirit, within ourselves, and we don't know what time we are in, right? We don't have a relationship to the elements. We don't have a relationship to time, to understanding where we are within the story. And so quite literally, I believe we have lost the plot. And I think it's no coincidence that we use these type of terms, to go off script, to lose the plot, to be out of tune, to be out of sync. These are very storytelling, sort of like narrative, descriptive words, but also very much to do with music. And I think music and storytelling go hand in hand together. And film is a version of storytelling, but music is a version of storytelling as well, or an expression of storytelling. And so I think deep within our psyche, we understand that we are not in harmony and resonance with the story of the universe. And to further that, the word universe for me means like universe, one song. And so I really believe that each of us are an individual instrument or an individual note that contributes to the symphony of the entire world or the entire universe. And so when we're out of sync, we feel unharmonized, it's when we're not in the same plot line or the same storyline as the rest of the world, or with what nature intends. And so I think it's very interesting that we can look at the elements, so that being air, earth, fire, and water, as a way to harmonize the body, in a way to harmonize our soul, our spirits, and just the world itself, right? So what is Avatar about? Avatar is about the main character called Aang, who he is the only person in the entire world that has the ability to use and learn all four elements. So pretty much every other character in the show can use the power of air, earth, fire, or water, or they might not have a superpower at all. And Aang's mission or Aang's role is to maintain harmony and balance within the world. And so when the world's thrown into chaos, it's his job to fight for that balance, essentially. And why I think this is such an important story in today's society is that we are out of balance, as I mentioned, out of harmony. And I see this as a metaphorical message and meaning. If you look at movies, right, you tend to believe you're the main character in the movie. And so by following the main character's actions and aspirations, visions, and goals and mission, I really believe it's calling that same sort of character out of us. And so we're being drawn to become the hero of the world or the hero of our own lives. But to put this on a more practical level and talking about the individual itself, it's about mastering all the different ways of being, mastering and understanding different elements and different people so that we can understand ourselves and the world better, so that we can live in harmony with the world. Because really what we're thinking about here, right, and where I think a lot of disharmony comes from, is the lack of understanding, the lack of empathy, the lack of consciousness to relate to others. Like, why does someone make this choice? You can't understand why they made that choice, and so you feel different to them. And we are different in some aspects, but fundamentally, when we come back to human spirit, we are all equal, we are all the same. And so each of us have the ability to understand and to learn other ways of being, but we also have a preference to how we are naturally adapted to the world, naturally born through genetics, through our upbringing, through the environment. And so our struggles in life come from not understanding others in context of the Avatar, in terms of this movie, and not being able to reconcile with that, right? So it's about, to put this in a religious context, as well. It's the fact that we don't see ourselves within others and can't see others within ourselves. And that causes that disharmony that we're talking about. So one thing I wanted to cover before we get into the actual deeper meaning of the Avatar Last Airbender is a really helpful tool that I've used in order to relate to others, in order to navigate my way in the world is the disc profile. I personally like the Big Five personality trait a lot better. I think there's a lot more research done behind that. And so it offers you more clarity in terms of different personality traits and their tendencies and what outcomes go with each type of character. But I'm going to use disc today because disc seems to map out over the elements a lot better, as there's 4 of them: direct, influential, steady, and cautious. And you have the 4 elements: air, earth, fire, and water. So what I'm going to do is quickly run through what each one of those represent, and then we'll kind of discuss from there. So we'll start with D. So D is direct. And when you come in contact with a direct person, they can seem quite fiery, a little dismissive. They're very action-orientated, very go, go, go. That's also yang energy. It's doing energy. It's masculine energy. We then have I, which is influential. And so influential would be the air character within the narrative of Avatar. And these characters are intellectual, they communicate very well, they're very witty, they have a lot of ideas, but then they lack consistency, they're not grounded, they're in the air, right? Then we're moving on to S, which is steady. And in the Avatar, that would be water. And also within, I think, ancient mythology and ancient wisdom, we can kind of see how they use the elements to navigate their way in their current time, in their framework of being. And so, so steady would be water. This is about emotions. It's about understanding our emotions, and it's about change, about letting go. And they're more like a feeling sort of person, right? So a lot more inward. And then lastly, we have cautious people, which would be seen as the earth elements in Avatar. And they are people that are they have a bit more barriers. They prefer security, stability. And so when you map this out, you can understand how certain character traits and ways of behavior and ways of thinking and being don't necessarily sync up with other ways of behavior and other ways of being. An example of that is influential, right? So if I'm full of ideas, it means that I'm probably more of a liberal person too, which means I like the flow and exchange of ideas. And so to back this with science, it's those people that are liberal also have a tendency to share, I think it's like parasite, not parasites, not disease, but like parasites or foreigners, their sexual orientation. They're happy to share gene mutation, essentially, where cautious people, earth people, like barriers, they like walls, they like protection. And so you can see how the 2 different types of ways of being and ideas can conflict with one another. And that causes that disharmony because one side can't understand the other side's behavior. However, to put this in a more Buddhist way, is that the middle way between those is the understanding. It's the marrying, it's the joining. It's what religion is too. Religion is the marrying of 2 opposite ideas to see how they're one. And so it means that there are going to be times in life where you're going to have to share ideas and be open and explore things and be creative. And there's going to be times in life where you're going to have to put up barriers, you're going to need shelter, you're going to need to be more protective, you're going to have to be more stubborn in your way. And so that, an example of that for myself, right, was, with investing. So when it comes to investing, to be more of an I or an air person would be very beneficial here because you can see where innovation is taking us. You see where technology is going. And so that would be something like, investing into Bitcoin very early on, or understanding cryptocurrency, being open to change, being open to the shift within currencies from from centralization to decentralization, right? Which is centralization would be earth, would be like very stable, secure. And decentralization would be air. So it's the opening, the sharing of ideas and openness and creativity. And so those who have a tendency to be more cautious, to be more of an earth element personality type, are going to really hold on to their ideas a lot more in the security and sense of safety, right? And sense of identity. And so in times of change, they're going to struggle the most. And someone who's more air or more of a water character, they're going to be able to change with the times a bit more easier because of their character traits and the way that they think and the way that they're happy to explore ideas. So at a time like this, air is going to be a more beneficial way to be open to and understand. And so the reason I'm sharing this with you is because if you understand the time we are in and what's happening in the world around us, we can then decide what kind of character do I need to embody to survive. And that's if you bring back Darwinism or evolution into this theory as well, the reason we have so many different types of characters and types of different ways of thinking and being, I'm using 4, okay, because it's a lot easier to be able to understand and communicate. And the purpose for labeling things is to be able to communicate ideas more effectively. Where if there was an infinite amount of ways and characters, which there are, it's very hard for me to then communicate that with you. So understand when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking in definitive terms that people are set in boxes. I'm more saying that we need these boxes and tools and labels to be able to communicate effectively so that we can evolve and change together. So keeping that in mind, the reason we have so many different character types and traits is because at a certain point in time, a certain character trait or personality type is going to excel. And so we need to be able to be very different and very diverse with our ranges in the world so that if chaos happens and things change, we're going to need a certain characters to step in. This is very true in business as well. And so, if you're doing the ideation phase of a business like logo design, the name, the values, the meaning, that's an air trait. It's open, it's creative. Then we'll probably step into something like, maybe even before that, you might even go into the water, which is like, what are the emotions of the business? What are the values? What's the reason why behind this, right? Then you could maybe step into air. Then you might have someone that's a bit more fire, who's like, okay, go act, make sales, do this. And they push things through in the world, right? And then you might need someone that's a bit more disciplined and makes better choices and is a bit more cautious, so they're more detailed orientated towards the later stages of business to maintain the business and keep it going. So that exact same philosophy would map over the world. So depending on the stage and evolution that the human psyche is going through, a certain character trait and type of way of being is going to enable you to live in more harmony within the world. It doesn't mean that you need to change completely. It just allows you to understand, okay, great, this is why this is happening. This is why we're changing. And I might need to tap into that, a bit of that more myself so that I can live in harmony with others around me. Okay. So I'm just going to take a look at my notes here for a second because there's quite a bit to go through. So yeah, Aang's role, right? Aang's role is to learn different elements and master the elements so that he can bring the world back into harmony. And so, as I mentioned, the avatar of Aang's character is the character we're watching the movie through, the lens we're watching it through. And so he's the antidote to this type of crisis. And so through embodying Aang, ourselves, can we then find harmony and peace within ourselves and in the world on a larger basis. And so this is pretty much a law or a framework that I use. It'd be a law for myself. I tend to take it quite metaphorically serious when I'm watching movies like this and episodes like this, because I think there's a lot of potent information within that, and I think information is passed down through stories, and I think stories are a storage of information. So and that's coded in characters, it's coded in ways of being. And so if you embody a certain character, you then by embodying that character, you then experience the knowledge of what it's like to be that character. And so if you embody the hero character, it means to feel it, to resonate with it, to be on that vibration or that frequency, you then understand the dynamics of what it means to be that character, which enables you with that type of knowledge. Okay, so like mirroring the time and age, right? So to go a little deeper here, if we look at the 4 seasons, again, that'll be air, earth, fire, and water, depending on what season we're in. So you can see that the division of 4, the framework of 4, works very well in our framework of time. And so that means, okay, we could say summer is fire. And so so summer is about action, it's about doing. So you can see how society changes based off the element. And so it means like a certain trend might come about. You're more active in this time of the year. And so certain fruits grow, things do things like, there's this action oriented behind that. And to relate that to our physiology, when the body heats up, it actually then causes it to go and act in the world. When there are lights on stage, it tells you to go act on stage. So there's something about heat and light that pushes the spirit into motion. And so you could look at motivation and heat and fire as a way to cultivate motivation. So now this really becomes about understanding how the elements can be used as tools to cultivate certain parts of the human psyche. And so if we divide this into 4 different pieces again, so this is air being the mind, fire being the spirit, body being, or earth being the body, and water being the soul. Everyone talks about mind, body, spirit. I think it also would be mind, body, soul if you're going to use this framework in context, right? I think it makes it a lot easier and a lot more simpler. So fire, summer, autumn. So moving into autumn would be earth. So it's about leaves falling down. So grounding, going inward, by the way. So going back down to the earth. Winter would be water as well. Actually, it makes a lot more sense because it lines up here too as well. So if you look at how this kind of, if you're watching on the camera, if you're watching how this kind of goes, so air goes into fire, fire goes into earth, and earth goes into water. And it is quite hard to find this knowledge because a lot of different texts and ancient texts from the past have it mixed up in different ways. Like you also have the medicine wheel in Mayan culture, Aztec culture, which uses the colors of black, red, white, and yellow. And this again maps over, but because this is such ancient knowledge, it's really hard to find consistency within it as well. And then you can also use the platonic solids too, which we'll tap into a little after this. So winter would be water, and then spring would be air, and spring is air because the breath of air and the fresh spring air. Also, the flowers are growing, and everything is coming about, and so it has this like aspect of life to it, and this growth. And so when you look at this wheel here, right? So to describe it to you, we have, imagine a square, like a quadrant. And in the top left box, you have air. Top right box, you have fire. Bottom right, you have earth. And bottom left, you have water. So the top 2 above the line on the axis is air and fire because they are extroverted character traits. So if someone's more of an air person, they're more intellectual, they share ideas, they're more extroverted than someone who is water, who is a lower element, right? It's towards the ground, and then the earth, obviously, again, itself. So these are more introverted character traits. And so you can map this over DISC as well. And DISC also has that within it. So DISC will say like I's and D's are more extroverted, and they'd say that S and C's are more introverted. And so you can use this framework to kind of map over DISC very, very well. And if you want to check out DISC, go do that in your own studies, and you can probably understand a bit more about how the elements kind of interact with this. But back to time, right, and understanding the time we're in. So if it means that we're now entering autumn, my training actually changes. Like from it becomes going from summer to becoming highly active, training outdoors, to actually journaling a lot more, doing a lot more writing, spending a lot more time grounding myself, and maybe even the style of training, the pace of it changes too. Then to go into winter, and winter is more, again, inward again, so reflective, more about to do with your emotions, staying indoors. It's got a different feel to it. And so you can change the way you act and the way that you train yourself depending on these, right? And then also then you have spring, and spring is about picking up again, so maybe getting more energetic again. Also, the food sources are different too, right? So you have fruit that grows in summer because of the high fructose and glucose, and so you have more energy because you can burn it off in the summer because you're more active. And then the fruit doesn't grow anymore in the winter time because you use less energy and expend less energy in winter and autumn because you're trying to conserve it because of the cold. So you can see how there's a certain time frame with things as well. So we really should, when it comes to our diet should also follow the elements and follow the seasons because there's a natural pattern to that, which is obviously going to help us tap into feeling good, thinking healthier, and just being happy and living healthier lives because we become in sync, in tune with the natural flow of nature and of time itself. So what I found really interesting as well on this topic of time was if you look at ancient Egyptian myth and you had like the Sphinx. So if you think about the Sphinx is a lion's body with an Aquarius's head, right? So what the pyramids were, this is one theory that I have that I've been that I looked up into, is that the pyramids are actually an astrological clock. So the Egyptians were tracking and tracing time, same as many cultures, right? So if you look at it from a bird's eye view, you have 3 pyramids, and next to each of those pyramids are 3 smaller pyramids, and these go into a vertical shape, a horizontal shape, and a vertical shape again. And if you look up at the sky, these 3 pyramids align exactly to Orion's belt. And Orion's belt, depending on the time that we are in through our rotation or our journey or cycle through the constellations and through the universe, the Orion's belt is either going to appear horizontal or it's going to appear vertical in the sky. Now, because we don't go through a long enough duration in our own lifetime, we never see it any different. But if you were to, eventually it would change. And so what that means is, and what they potentially were doing is they were tracking the time and what constellation and age they were in. And so it means that we have now entered a 12,000 year cycle where it was the age of Leo 12,000 years ago, and now we're in the age of Aquarius. And so they are also exactly one whole rotation away from each other. So that's why I believe they had the Aquarius head and the Sphinx's body, because they were tracing this exact moment in time. And that's why I think ancient Egyptian myth is such a prevalent, I think a lot of people are just drawn to that for some reason, stronger than other cultures. I think ancient Greek is also there too, but for some reason, I think Egyptian is just one of the most mysterious ones, and it seems to be what we're most fascinated in. And I think that's why, because they knew that this time would mirror their time in some sort of way. And so how to relate this, right, to make this in a practical sense, like what's all this about? Well, the age of Leo 12,000 years ago, if we look at Leo represents a lion, it's about gold, right? So everything back then was about, wearing gold, taking gold to the grave, and it was of high value. And in 2012, we had the whole end of the world through the Mayan calendar, and that for me is actually just the end of an age. And so we also have I think it's 3 or 4 different ages, where you have the Bronze Age, 4 ages: the Bronze Age, Iron Age, Silver Age, and Golden Age. And these 4 ages last. I forget the timing of this, but I need to actually write this stuff down. But essentially, each couple of thousand years, we transition through each of the ages. And so it just means that we left one age to another age. It means we left one way of thinking and one way of being into another way of thinking, another way of being. And so we went from an earth element into an air element, and which is Aquarius. So Aquarius would be an air element. And so it means that in terms of time, in terms of where we are in the universe, in terms of our story as a collective, is we're shifting our values from stability, security, and centralization into decentralization, into innovation, into technology, right? And so it's funny that now we have digital gold come about in 2010, 2012, exactly when the switch was happening from the end of the world, which isn't the end of the world physically, it's the end of the world psychologically, and maybe even the psyche. So it's the death of one way of being into another way of being. And you could look at this as an internal reflection too, in times of your life, there are going to be moments in time where the way you're behaving doesn't work anymore. So maybe you go through a time of depression. And so that depression causes change. It causes you to let go and kill parts of yourself that weren't serving you so that you can evolve and move on. And that's what the human spirit does. And so I think everything is fractal. And so if we take on these laws like fractalization, meaning that what happens internally happens externally on a higher scale, then the same thing would happen to the world's psyche and consciousness as it moves through time. However, its time is a lot slower than our time because we're smaller in an aspect, right? So it's interesting. It's an interesting theory. I'd like to explore that a bit more, but I really think that the mapping of stars, the mapping of time in relation to the sun, in relation to like another sun called Sirius, in terms of light, I'd say can change the human behavior. Another fun fact I have with that is, if you didn't know this, that our sun actually dances with another sun called Sirius. And to really highlight the effect of storytelling and mythology, what's her name? J.K. Rowling spoke about this as well in Harry Potter. So you have Sirius as well, who's a character. You have Draco, again, it's another constellation. You have there's a bunch of like astrology references within Harry Potter. And so I think a lot of myth is actually mimicking the stars in astrology. And so when people say like, oh, is astrology real? Is the zodiac sign real? To some extent it is, right? And it doesn't have to be in a woo-woo way or a woo-woo spiritual way, but it could be in a very practical way. And we could look at it as if like the stars represent a story of the human psyche. So you can imagine that being in a very primal state, and within tribes back in the day, there was a lot of emphasis behind trying to map out the constellation and the stars and time and direction. And so you'd have to then project your own human psyche, your own story, onto the external environment, because depending on what the environment is doing, depending on where the stars are, depending on where the sun is, it's going to affect your life and your behavior. And so it makes sense that a lot of ancient cultures would project their own psychology onto the stars. And so when we're looking at the stars, I like to see it as a way that we are reading the inner story of the human psyche. And so that's why we also have different days of the week. And so Monday is Moon Day. Tuesday is in Italian is Martedì, which is Mars. Wednesday is Mercredi, which is Mercury. Thursday is Thursday, which is Jupiter. Friday is Venerdì, so it's Venus. Saturday, Saturn, and Sunday, the Sun. And so even the days of the week are named after gods, Roman gods, and different elements, right? So Mercury is the element of air, and so on Wednesdays you would pray to the god of Mercury, and so there's something there within this, and so I'd like to explore that a little bit deeper. And actually, my next year of studies is going to be traveling around the world to understand a bit more of ancient philosophy and culture a bit more, so I can start to map this out and provide you guys with a bit more content in detail and practical use of this, because a lot of this is practical in the sense of it gives me a lot of meaning and purpose and understanding that everything is connected in the world. However, for myself, it's about finding a bit more of the practicality behind it and the science behind it, which I believe is catching up to this sort of stuff, so that we can actually show how story and and mythology from the past is very, very useful in today's society because it's actually a reflection of our inner psyche as opposed to something external. I'm not going to debate whether or not a lot of these things are literal or not. It's more about the inner workings, the inner psychology behind a lot of this stuff. So, as I said, we have the fractal zodiac year and the month and the day. All of that, is needed in business. And so, relating this back to the avatar, right? We have these different types of characters and different ways of being. And so, to name you a few of the characters, you have Aang. So, Aang comes from the air nomads, and so he's a very outgoing, social sort of person. We have Katara and her brother Sokka from the Water Tribe, and so they are more emotional. They're the hope. They're the ones that believe in Aang. They're also kind of the good characters. We have Zuko, who starts off as the antagonist in the TV series, and you can see how much passion and anger he has, right? Because that's a fiery trait. And then you have Toph, who's blind, but she's from the Earth Tribe, and she's very stubborn, very strong. And so you can see how even in the teaching of the show, her and Aang don't really get along too well in the beginning when they're training together because Earth is the opposite element of air. And so if we're looking at this quadrant, you can map out the opposites. And so you'll see that air being top left and Earth being the bottom right, there's going to be more resistance there because they're the furthest apart. Where air and fire are both going in upward directions, and so they might get along in conversations, but because of the directness of fire and its closeness to Earth, right, it's kind of more stubborn and a bit more direct and cutthroat, that it kind of hurts the emotional side of water and air sort of people. So it's interesting how we can map out all this ancient mythology and ancient sort of knowledge onto our modern world. And I think that provides us with a lot more context and meaning in today's society, and provides us with a way of understanding the world a bit better, that what we are experiencing externally outside of ourselves is also what's happening internally. And to further exaggerate this point with the elements, I would go as far to say that you could tap into each of these elements in a practical, physical way to cultivate these sort of things. So, example, air is the element of the mind. And so if you wanted to focus on your mindset, if you wanted to change your mind, then you just breathe differently. Take a deep breath in and out, and you're a lot calmer. Your thinking's calmer, it's slower. If I was to change your breathing and you were to take more breaths in per second, then that would change your state of being, and you become more aroused, and you're hyper sort of focused, but you're just kind of scattered in some sense. Like you're very reactive, and so your thoughts aren't as clear. They're a bit more short and precise. Then we look at fire and spirit, and so if you're someone who's lacking motivation, the best way to kind of pull yourself out of motivation equals movement, and that is true in the fact that motivation comes from the Latin word movere, which is to move. And so to cultivate spirit more is to move again. So if you want to feel like you're be motivated again, what the first thing you have to do is actually just move. Don't worry about your thoughts. Don't worry about the emotions. Just get out and move. Go spend time in the sun. Heat the body up. Feel that warmth again, and you'll feel motivated. When you feel demotivated, when you feel depressed, you tend to go inward, right? So you can see how the fire is outward, extroverted. You're out there in the world acting. And then when you're a little more depressed, which is a natural state to be in too, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing. There's going to be times where you ebb and flow, right? So to go more inward, to be with yourself, is more colder. It's like you spend time in the dark. You spend time at home. And water is the element of healing, right? So it's about, if you're feeling like you've been in the world acting so much and so hard and tirelessly because you're burning the fuel, right? Literally burning fuel and energy, right? That then affects the soul, right? The spirit and the soul kind of work together like that. So they need each other. And so it's that push and pull that the yang and the yin, the masculine and the feminine. So the masculine would be fire and the feminine would be water. And so water is coming back into the body. That's why you see, I think, a lot more ice baths coming about now, because we've been so much into the yang aspect of society, meaning go, 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 being direct, pushing forward, as opposed to coming back into the body. And that's what we're doing now. We're tapping more back into breath work and tapping more into ice baths because it's more of an inward action as opposed to the outward sort of stuff. And then if you wanted to tap into your body a bit more and heal the body and feel strong, then what you would do is you look at nutrition. So nutrition comes from the earth. That'll be part of the earth element, right? So you're fueling the body better. And then you're also maybe going to do some grounding. So if you go outside, go for a walk, that then discharges the electricity in the body and resets your circadian rhythm. And so that puts you back into a harmonious state with your body. And so you can see how the natural elements out in the world can affect our physiology, can affect our spirit, body, soul, and mind by simply interacting with it. And so if you know that you're overworking one side of these four elements, you can tend to extend out to the opposite element to understand it a bit more and integrate it into yourself to find harmony and balance, which is what the avatar and what the show is about. And I tend to do this a lot. And so again, you could look at the seasons and just cultivate your life a bit more around the seasons to enable this sort of balanced lifestyle and balanced way of being. And what I'm actually doing, one of my projects at the moment is called the Fit Element, which is becoming fit and healthy by being balanced around all these elements as opposed to focusing on one way. Like, people either tend to just do like HIIT boxing and cardio classes, they're taking caffeine, they're so forward and they're just like pushing, and they're burning the fuel, but they never spend time with their thoughts, they never spend time with their emotions. And so they're neglecting one part of health and one part of fitness because although all these things are categorized differently, it's about the fifth element, which is what I wanted to talk about. So I called it fit because originally it was going to be called the fifth element. And the fifth element in all of this is yourself. And to bring some esoteric knowledge to the table here is if we look at Plato in ancient Greek myth, is you have the 5 platonic solids and each of those represent a different element. And the fifth element is ether. And ether is about it's kind of like God or like the etheric field or the which is what brings it all together. And so yes, there are 4 elements, but the fifth I would say is yourself and how you create balance within all these things, because it's ultimately you who uses either fire, earth, water, or air, who either neglects the body, is too developed into the emotions, and too emotional. Like it's really about you, and all this stuff is really the story of the human psyche. And so the greatest point I'm trying to make here is that all these stories, all these ways of being, all this stuff is really comes from within yourself. And if you can understand how at times in your life you're going to need to be more rigid and more earthy, times in your life you're going to have to need more fire to be motivated to go act on your dreams, times where you need to be more like air when you're cultivating, writing, journaling, coming up with the ideas. Or you might simply need someone who's more like that because you're so set in your way that you understand, hey, for me to cultivate a healthy relationship, a healthy business, I'm going to need and seek out the opposite of what I am because they are also important too. Although different, it doesn't mean that they are lesser or not as worthy as yourself, right? And I think that's really where the problem's coming into the world. And the very problem that we find within the Avatar Last Airbender is that what sets the world into chaos is that the Fire Nation, which I believe is a mirror of the Nazis in Germany, is they believe that they are the best race. They believe that it is the age of fire, it is the age of destruction and rebirth and the phoenix sort of thing, right? So they go around killing off the other nations so that everyone can live in their way of being. And so what this really means in terms of our inner psychology, it's like there's a part within ourselves that believes that our way of being is the best way of being. And we want to teach this and impose this on the rest of the world. And so although you think that's a great intention, it's fascinating how this story provides an antidote to that because it's really about the balance and understanding of all ways of being and accepting all ways of being that provides harmony as opposed to being like, this is my way, this is how we do things. this is the way things should be, and like, this race sucks, and this thing, like it's horrific, and it causes a lot of pain and war and suffering in the world. And that's what you see in Avatar: Last Airbender. It's like the war starts because the Fire Nation enters their age, enters their time of being, and they use that extra power, right, to then impose their way onto others. Because, as I mentioned, the time of being that we're in, so we've entered the air, right? We'd have to be careful that we don't lose our groundedness, and we don't completely dismiss labels, which is what's happening right now, right? We've gone from earth to air. So the opposite of air would be, like I said, the earth element. And so although ideas are great, although innovation is good, although technology provides us a lot of solutions, we are at risk of losing the opposite of air, which is our groundedness, our connectedness, our sense of security, our sense of self, our identity, our barriers, our labels. And, we see this rippling out in society, right? Because, we're tossing away labels. We're tossing away structures. We're tossing away all the things that provided us with a sense of security and safety, and see the negative effect of security and safety is that it causes oppression. It causes us to conform, to be uniform. And so it causes oppression when it becomes too much. And so it doesn't mean that the way of earth benders or earth is the wrong way of being, but there's a certain time and place for it. And it can become too much that it becomes oppressive and then causes an outburst and causes this this opposite reaction, which is what I believe has happened in today's world. Is we became so structured and rigid and so oppressive that we then cause an explosion of this air mentality of coming out and just like having just no sense of security, or just toss away everything, which is quite dangerous. And so although again I think it's quite natural too, because if you look at the way that these elements interact with one another, you can see how these elements come about and how these different ways of being and the way that society and politics kind of maps itself out based off the reactions and differences within one another and how it kind of expresses itself in reality. We can then understand why and how these different things happen in the world. And so that's why I think it's very, very important to understand these, I guess, 4 categorical types, to understand a bit more how they interrelate with one another and relate to one another, so that we can ultimately find the truth and the harmony and balance within ourselves that causes that harmony and balance within the world. So I'd like to do a bit more of a deeper dive into this one day as well. But you can find more information on this either through reaching out for coaching. It's essentially what I would love to coach people on and what I'm creating a business around. So it's about becoming spiritually fit, mentally fit, physically fit, and emotionally fit, as opposed to just one way of fitness. I think we need a more holistic approach to fitness and to health in general. So so you can reach out if you want more information just about this stuff in general. Otherwise, take a listen to the other episodes. I'll be coming out with my next episode on The Lion King and a deep dive in the psychology behind that. Otherwise, I will see you guys then, and have a beautiful day. And I hope that this was beneficial and informational to you. And I really, really hope that we can find a place of harmony and peace within ourselves, and cultivate that human spirit a lot more. And hopefully our individual pursuit of balance and harmony and spirit within and livelihood and love can then reflect and add to the cup of consciousness in the world. So blessings, everyone. Love you. Have a good one. And I'll speak to you soon.